Now, in a trial, there's generally two types of evidence. The star witnesses, like we started to hear from, that's testimonial evidence, and all the other stuff, what they call hard evidence, receipts, paper, records, all of that is the goods. The DA, in this opening statement that we followed all through this week here, told the jury they're going to hear not only the goods through the receipts and the records I mentioned and the finances that prove the fraud, but also an actual recorded conversation. That's out-of-court statements that can be confirmed about the payments from Cohen that went on Trump's behalf, they say. And that dates back to September 2016. And this is interesting as we take it all in, and we've had a couple days to make sense of it. The DA's team notes you will even hear Mr. Trump suggest in his own voice paying in cash. And here's what's interesting about witnessing a trial, and if you've been around American life, even before we ever got a presidential level defendant trial, you may know that trials have always captivated us. We had O.J. pass recently, and everyone thought back, everyone who was old enough, to where they were when that case was going on and when that verdict came in. And one of the reasons that trials are so captivating is that when you're on the outside, you actually have a better seat than the jurors. What I mean by that is they're limited to the evidence in court, and they're limited to the timeline in court. And all of us following it, and I don't just say this as a nerdy legal reporter or lawyer, but all of us who are interested enough to follow this can then learn more and know more in real time than the juror is actually going to know. So I guarantee you there are people on that jury, and we watch the screening process, who may not remember what was in the news all those years back, may not have been following this as closely as you or us. So they may not have recently heard what I'm about to play, which is what they were previewed. They haven't heard it yet. Opening statements is what you're going to get. Then later, a good lawyer on either side, defense or prosecution, will pay off those promises. But you don't have to wait. If you were in the jury, you would. We can remember now what the DA's team is talking about. We have that recording.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David. I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So
pay with cash.
No.
Pay with cash? No. Now, it is interesting, to say the least, that Michael Cohen was making furtive tapes of his own client, and you can expect on cross-examination the Trump defense to try to attack him for that. But from an evidence perspective, from learning the truth, and again, trials are not supposed to be about getting someone or going after someone you don't like for other reasons. They're supposed to be about finding facts beyond a reasonable doubt. For getting to the truth, that is some really, really strong evidence. That is why the DA mentioned it in their opening. Remember, they might have 100 exhibits. They don't go through all 100. That would bore a jury to tears. But they mentioned that one because it matters so much, because it shows, the DA argues, criminal intent. You don't pay large sums in cash, even in New York, even in real estate. When you get up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, that would be bizarre. Indeed, Donald Trump's been around the block. He may know, and you may know, when you take out a sum of over 10, 15K, it already creates an alert. If you just take 15K cash out of the ATM, it creates a banking alert. That's how suspicious it is. If you take 130K out, yeah, the authorities are onto it. So that's not always the best idea, just if you don't want to get caught, but it also is suspicious. And that's not all. The DA prosecution team telling the jury they will also have an extensive paper trail, bank records, emails, text messages, phone logs, business documents, and other records that the DA says they will show the jury to show that Trump reimbursed Cohen through those monthly checks. And again, we know what they're talking about. Donald Trump's big loopy signature on each of those checks. And more. This star witness I've mentioned, the tabloid publisher David Pecker, well, he's the first witness, as you probably know from following this trial. They brought him right out. And he said, and this again is part of the prosecution's case, he's their witness. And if the defense has witnesses that they think help their side, as I've told you, we'll be covering that. But right now, we're on the prosecution side. And they put him out first to grab the attention and to make this very clear that the DA's argument is this is much bigger than some accounting error. This is much bigger than just business fraud, even though that's not a good thing. It's alone a misdemeanor. And he testified that this was a big deal, that it was a candidate-level thing, not done through intermediaries or cutouts or staff, that Donald Trump himself worked directly with Pecker on this plan that Trump believed would help him win the election. And he said on the stand, I told the tabloid leadership of the Inquirer, we're going to try to help the Trump campaign. And this was hatched in a 2015 meeting where he would be Donald Trump's secret eyes and ears. And that he would publish positive stories about Trump and negative stories about Trump's opponents. And boy, did he deliver. Now remember, this is part of a larger narrative. In fairness to Trump, as a defendant, we should note that the media and various types of media publish all kinds of things. And sometimes it's very clear whether they have positive or negative views on certain people. And in media, some people will tell you that's based on the facts, and other people will say it's based on ideology or some other alliance. So this part that I'm showing you is a pattern that the prosecution says made a crime. It itself is not necessarily a crime. We see those positive stories of Trump, which, as Rachel and others have pointed out in our coverage this week, were on the newsstands at every major grocery store in America, hitting people who might not read the inside or follow the news as closely. And this went on through the 2016 election cycle. In fact, it went on and on, Pecker describing how the tabloid would then go after Trump's opponents in ways that even other Trump-friendly media might find going too far. After the debates, based on the success that some of the other candidates had, Pecker said he would receive a call from Michael Cohen himself, who would direct which candidate and which direction we should go. Now, that's important because it makes it sound like something more than what I mentioned earlier, that media cover things and might cover things positively or negatively. It sounds more like orders being phoned in, like they became an arm of the Trump campaign, and that included following something that Donald Trump is well known for, lying and embellishing and spinning his way through everything. Again, on the stand, Pecker says we would embellish it. All of this coming from Cohen. And the tabloid went after Ted Cruz, as we have covered through the week, Trump's biggest rival at the time. Cruz famously finished second only to Trump in that primary. There was the cover story that some might view as defamatory, falsely saying Cruz's father was somehow linked to the JFK assassination. I'm showing this to you as criminal evidence. I'm not showing this to you as true, in fairness to Senator Cruz. Now, Pecker testified in court that what you see on your screen was not only false, but they knew it was false from the start. In other words, sometimes you have something come out and has to be corrected. This should have been corrected in advance. It should have never run because they knew it was, quote, manufactured, according to the star witness himself. And Trump used all this against Cruz at the time, and Cruz punched back.
All I did is point out the fact that on the cover of the National Enquirer, there was a picture of him and crazy Lee Harvey Oswald having breakfast. Now, Ted never denied that it was his father. Instead, he said, Donald Trump, I had nothing to do with it.
Donald's source for this is the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer is tabloid trash, but it's run by his good friend David Pecker, the CEO, who's endorsed Donald Trump. And so the National Enquirer has become his hit piece that he uses to smear anybody and everybody.
Ted Cruz was correct. Let me repeat. Ted Cruz was correct. And people watching that at the time might have covered it like horse race politics, or, well, these are just two politicians fighting, or, okay, they dragged the Enquirer into it. But what was not well exposed at the time, what it only took a federal case, the separate investigation in SDNY, and then this case, and now Pecker's immunity and him coming to the stand, what we now learn many years later is that Ted Cruz was right about that very point, and that it was more than just unfair and inaccurate, that it was a kind of political deal. And you can't rerun the primary and you can't rerun the general, but you can imagine, for all the talk about whether this is somehow unfair to Trump from the left or the Democrats, and look, people have every right to criticize the justice system. I mentioned OJ. That happened in that case, too. If you're not under a gag order, if you're not the defendant, other people can weigh in. That's fine. That's America. But what's interesting here is, even for within the Republican Party, what if at the time more Republicans just simply had the facts that those kind of attacks, which might have been dragging down Cruz, he obviously felt they were big enough that he had to respond, were actually coming from this secret deal? That, as Ted Cruz said, it was David Pecker, not just having fun with tabloid stories, but actually trying to do something to distort that election. Pretty interesting. We're also going to hear more testimony from Pecker tomorrow. It is, all in all, has been a big and tough time for defendant Trump in this case. And the DA got off to a very strong start here. Let's remember that many experts who've been around New York courtrooms where they're doing this 4 days a week said it could take weeks to pick the jury. And Donald Trump could do all these things meantime to make it more chaotic. Well, just as he failed to delay the start of this thing, he also failed to drag out the jury process more than 4 days, work days, failed to move this case. He said, oh, he could never get a fair trial there. Failed in many ways to stop what has now begun as of Monday. Everything up to this was set up. But starting Monday, going through the last 2 days and what will resume again tomorrow, is a methodical, evidence-backed, detailed case with a lot of star witnesses who know Trump or worked for him or worked privately for him for years. This is not resistance theater, and this is not supposed to be politics, although it may be dealing with a lot of campaign political history. This is a 2x4 against a very silent, very cowed defendant who is just learning what life is like on that side of the table. The first defense is simple. They claim nothing happened. That is a factual defense. Nothing happened. Very simple. And the idea that nothing happened means basically this defendant didn't do anything wrong, period. A simple defense. And by the way, Trump's lawyers began telegraphing that they will rely more heavily on these kind of factual defenses. And don't underestimate simplicity. It is an important tool and lens when you're dealing with a jury. In fact, Trump defense attorney Will Scharf said they'd be doing this on the eve of the trial. Trump's lawyers denying that Trump had any tryst with Stormy Daniels, and that means that whatever she might testify, even if, quote, salacious, they told the jury, it just does not matter. Now, the lawyers similarly deny that Trump took any actions to try to pay her at the time, and that he didn't lie about any payments that were made to her, whether on his behalf or by someone else. To support that, of course, they got to deny the DA's evidence that suggests Trump was involved. So, faced with the receipts, how do you do that? Well, there are answers to this. And if you hear people say, oh, it's open and shut, it's one-sided, it's all easy, that's probably not someone who's very versed in how these trials actually work. Because the defense attorney, Todd Blanche, did have a strategy for this, and it's important to take a look at what they're doing. He told the jury that, okay, if there are these papers and evidence, they still don't automatically implicate Trump because he had, quote, nothing to do with any of those 34 pieces of paper, except that he signed onto the checks in the White House while he was running the country. That's not a crime, he argued. So that is a denial that anything criminal happened. Now, these type of denials that I'm telling you are not the only options. The next defense they have, you've certainly heard about, and I want to be clear, you can also think of this as a factual defense because they argue if anything bad did happen, then Michael Cohen did it, not defendant Trump. If anything happened, Cohen did it. Now, here's how that defense works as a counterattack, because they said, quote, unbeknownst to Trump, in all the years that Cohen worked for him, Cohen was also a criminal. Now, notice that is a little different than just saying nothing happened. Because if nothing bad happened, you wouldn't have to blame anyone, right? It's like, are you saying nobody ate the cookies, or are you saying somebody else ate the cookies? And as soon as you start saying somebody else ate the cookies, you're kind of admitting the cookies are gone, right? So you don't have to call some other witness a criminal or go after all this tough talk unless your alternative factual defense is, okay, maybe something happened, but they did it, the other guy. Now, Trump's legal team has been at this one for a while, which is why I'm betting if you watch the news, this might be familiar to you, the idea that they want to go at Cohen. In fact, both Scharf, who I just showed you, and then Trump defense attorney Joe Tacopina, you may remember, was sitting at that same arraignment table when Trump first learned what it means to be a defendant. Well, he also made this defense. And then there's a third defense. We also heard that this week, although I think, from what I can tell, it's gotten a little less scrutiny. But after those factual denials, if anything happened, then the argument is, okay, it's still not against the law. This is a strictly legal defense. You see how the first two we stamped factual, just to keep it clear? That's all about whether the thing went down or who did it. This is legal. If anything happened, maybe it's not against the law. Now, this matters because let me tell you something. A jury could agree with this, or one or two people on the jury could get confused by this. And it has an extra benefit as a legal argument. It is stronger to help overturn even a conviction on appeal. I'm not going to get into all the weeds on that. We'll come back to this. We have weeks together if you keep watching the trial, but I'll remind you, we'll get into it more later. It is easier to get a conviction overturned on a legal appeal than one of the factual ones. And every defendant, including this one, has the right to appeal. Now, Rachel emphasized this in MSNBC's coverage on the first night of opening arguments, that this point that I'm talking about now, this legal defense, was the exact flashpoint where we heard the lawyers clash the most with the spicy and passionate objections during the opening itself. Trump's defense lawyers claimed that whatever happened, even if the jury thinks Trump did some of the things they deny, they claim that would still legally not be a crime. Rachel read this out, and I'm going to read it out again for you because it was an interesting moment. They said, oh, Cohen paying Daniels $130K for her agreeing not to publicly spread false claims about Trump is not illegal, according to Trump's defense lawyer. Now, the lawyer there says the word false. But the claim is key because it's a legal defense for the jury, even if they think Daniels' claims were true. In other words, even if the jury says, well, I do think they had some history or tryst, but maybe it's okay to sign an NDA. Maybe that's not a crime. And that was the exact moment when the DA's team objected. And then Trump's lawyer had to try a different route and put it this way. An NDA signing is perfectly legal. You'll learn companies do that all the time. And the defense there is a legal defense. NDAs can be legal. NDAs also can be off base. So the idea is that Trump can be convicted for every part of a plot carried out by others, just as the defense can attack the idea that the catch and kill plot was itself an illegal campaign activity. Now, take a breath. Those are the three types of defenses. The reason this one matters is that without a second crime, like these election law violations, there's no felony. If there's no felony, then there's no felony trial, and this whole thing kind of evaporates into a smaller misdemeanor case. Now, earlier tonight, we were talking to the former SDNY chief, David Kelly, and we talked about this exact law the DA is using that discusses whether you promote or prevent the election of a person of public office by unlawful means. So that could matter a lot, and it could matter on appeal if they lay the predicate, the foundation, to say, hey, we discussed this at trial, and we're discussing it on appeal. This doesn't seem like the right application of that law. Again, that's not them saying it didn't happen, and it's not them blaming Cohen. It's saying even if it happened and even if he did it, maybe that's not an election law violation. Now, we've heard this argument before, which is why we try to go to the source around here, because long before this week's opening arguments, Attorney Tacopina hammered this same attack on the election law in our interview. And while we had a back and forth, and I'll show you some of it, legally, this could potentially work. The DA is saying the money was under the table campaign spending. Then Trump lawyer Tacopina and his lawyers today have basically been arguing if Trump would pay that money irrespective of the campaign, if he paid other NDAs, or if the Inquirer did this other times, then this supposed campaign law violation could evaporate. Trump's current lead defense lawyer built on that same idea we heard from Tacopina, and he went even larger this week, saying you could take all the talk about magazine covers and tabloids and plots to influence the election, but what if you turn it around and argue that these kind of things in the media and deals and arrangements to influence elections, not only are they not crimes, he argued, they're actually something far more familiar. There's nothing wrong, he told the jury, with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. Now, whether the jury sees all these deals as clear, intentional crimes or more like the spin and the scum that can exist at the margins of all kinds of political ploys to influence an election, that is the big question. Was it, in other words, politics as usual? This is what this case could boil down to. Past the receipts and a lot of the star witnesses, was this second thing clearly a campaign crime, or was it democracy?